Listeners everywhere, welcome to the Movie Show with Joel and Ryan, the weekly fix for your screen addiction and a trusted source for discussion of all things film and television. Please keep in mind that for the purposes of this podcast, Joel and Ryan are not acting as journalists, but rather fellow moving picture enthusiasts. All of their opinions should be taken as such. Also, please be warned that while Joel and Ryan may seem like petulant children, they are, in fact, adults who may occasionally use adult language. While they promise to bleep out all the worst words, it's a good bet you will still understand what they were saying. And now, with no further ado, here's Joel and Ryan.
Hello, and welcome to the Movie Show with Joel and Ryan. And everybody listening, there is one clue that you overlooked. That awash evoom is movie show spelled backwards. Yeah, a little teaser. Welcome to the Movie Show with Joel and Ryan. I am Joel.
And I'm Ryan.
And we got a fun show. We got a kind of a hodgepodgey show for you today. A weird deep dive. A deep dive that I don't think anyone saw coming, but you should have, because you know what? It's a darn fine movie. We are going to be talking about. I mean, it's fun, and you know, I saw someone review. We're going to be talking about young Sherlock Holmes later, and I saw someone. I think it was on IMDb or something like that, and they said, like, you know, as much as this movie didn't do well when it first came out, you know, part of what, you know, should be taken into consideration on how good a movie is does it hold up after years and years, you know, after years and years. And this movie is over 30 years old. And you know, little spoiler alert or a little preview. It holds up. It holds up. It's fun. But we will get there. So we're into December. We're coming to the end of it here. Only this is the penultimate show of this season. And so we got a lot to cover it. But first, let's get into Hey Ryan, what you watching? What you watching lately? I might make this a segment. This might be a segment in next season where I just go, Hey Ryan.
Meaning that some music or something's going to play.
There might be some 4-minute intro that I create that just says what you watching.
Back in the old days, we did this before every show. What are you watching? What are you doing? What are you up to?
And then we're like, and then so many of our
shows started bumping up against 2 hours and 15 minutes. We're like, maybe we don't need to do that every week.
Yeah.
The other reason we don't need to do it is that this is the 4th year of the show, and I watch the same movies every year, like around the same time. So
every once in a while, something new sneaks in there.
Yeah, I won't repeat myself as much. This is a movie we talked about in a sort of little discussion like this before. It's extraordinarily in a year, Australian sort of mainstream filmmaker Philip Noyce made 2 movies in the same year. One was The Rabbit-Proof Fence, about the stolen generation in Australia. It's an amazing movie. We're going to talk about that more in a second. The other is one of my favorite remakes of all time, one of my favorite novel adaptations of all time, The Quiet American.
Yes.
Rabbit-Proof Fence has an incredible, gold selling soundtrack by Peter Gabriel of all people. It's because it's a very modest film, and it has this guy who he obviously did Last Temptation of Christ most famously and some other things throughout the years, Birdie. But, you know, Gabriel he's only done movie scores 4 times or 5 times or something. So it's special when he does it. And the score for Quiet America was done by Craig Armstrong at the height of his powers. It's equally very impressive. So something about those 2 movies that I love, and I always watch them. But today we'll concentrate a little bit because I tend to get pretty gushy about Quiet America, but that really is featured in our shows and why we love it so much.
Yeah.
And if we ever do Brandon, what's his face episode?
Brendan Fraser, yeah.
Yeah, if we ever do it might end up on a Michael Caine list, or it might not.
Yeah,
but
we cover
be high on a Brandon Fraser list because
if we ever talk about the Brendan Fraser-sance.
he's no joke, and he's really, really special in that film. And that was before he went away. That was, he's really, really good in it. But Rabbit Proof Fence is the story of this, this new law that was passed. I can't remember the name of the law, but it's even back in the 30s or whatever. The laws always had these very friendly name, the Family Act, and the this or that, and they were always these horrific, awful things. And what it basically did was it gave this sort of czar of the government agency, and the film played really brilliantly by Kenneth Branagh, really understated performance by him, and who's given the authority to just do whatever he wants with Australia's indigenous population. There were they were called half-caste children. There were these white Australian workers who would go out into the country to do this project or that. We experienced a little this in a slightly more modern sense, and we talked about Red Dog a few shows back. But all, this working class of people who traveled around in this very wild place and did these public works projects and things, or corporate projects. And they would inevitably knock up lots of like native population. And the further you go back in time, the more of this is a phenomena. And so you get these half white, half Aboriginal children. And the government decided that at least the half white part of them, they were responsible for. So they abducted them, essentially. And they did this till 1970. They did it for 50 years. Multi-generations of kids that the government just said, they brought them, there's this history of this with our own Aboriginal population in America, the re-education camps and stuff. That's exactly what this was. And the most a half-caste, sorry to keep repeating that rather offensive phrase, but I think it has power when you say it, that the best a half-caste kid, even a re-educated one, could hope to achieve was servitude, essentially. They became the servant classes, really, for rich white Australians for generations. And they were never reunited with their parents. They were taken from places without addresses, with just really no easy way. The film makes a real case out of it, showing you how difficult it is, even if you have gumption beyond measurement, to find your way back. They make it impossible. Australia itself makes it impossible, really. The country at the time, and still to some degree, is vivisected by this rather T-shaped rabbit-proof fence, transverses almost huge swaths of the continent. It was at the time, and maybe still be, the largest man-made fence in the world. And the kids live near it. And when they escape from their re-education camp, they bump into it and they see it as their map homeward. Although they don't quite realize that there's one that runs north and south, and there's a big T, and they don't really know which direction they're going. They know where the sun's rising and setting, but it's tricky for them to find their way home, these girls. And there's a great Rabbit Proof Fence, without going into every lick in detail, it's just a fantastic piece of visual storytelling, and it has for a movie that focuses on these girls, the youngest of which is 7 years old. There's 3 of them that are abducted and consequently escape. They escape just by leaving one day. It's not expected that they're going to even try and do that. Right. Or if they do, you'll find them down the road or whatever, and just bring them back. These girls went a long way, and there was an Aboriginal tracker played by the great. Do you have his name up?
Sorry, I was looking at
Paul. I think is his first name. He was in. Paul starts with a G, Galilipol or something. I'm saying it wrong, so sorry about that. But
no, it's David Gupilil. David.
Yeah, he actually has a very big, long, kind of 5-part Aboriginal name, which if we were really clever, we'd have queued that up in advance. But David died recently, so he was in.
Yeah, he did very recently.
He was just couple of weeks ago, I think.
Now,
he
the
was
29th,
he was basically in all these fantastic. He was in Australia and he's in Quigley Down Under, I think, briefly, but I think he's most remembered in Australia for being the young boy in Walkabout 1971, which, as far as I'm aware, and Australians, maybe we could get Pritchard back on the show and he could school us on this, I'm sure. But the most significant film that I'm aware of that featured Australian Aboriginals was Walkabout, and he's sort of the featured character in that. And in this film, it's funny, he plays a tracker working for the government, because the government stooges, the main one played by Jason, pretty famous actor now, wasn't at the time, Jason
Clarke.
Yeah, Jason Clarke. He plays the sheriff, a Nottingham type character or whatever. He can sit there with a gun, and he's the one who abducts these kids when he knows where to find them, but he can't track kids across the outback. So they need an Aboriginal to do that for them. And it's interesting. That whole dynamic is very, very interesting. Obviously, Branagh's, well-meaning bureaucratic dictatorship is very interesting to watch, but the film lives and breathes with these three little girls, and that's where it has to function. And they can't cut that part short, and they can't make that feel like it's only a third of the movie, or you'd be missing what the thing is, the heart of the thing. And they don't, and it's extremely impressive. Very raw performances, but very emotionally in the moment in all the ways that matter most. And there's a documentary about that film. It's only about 45 minutes long. It was made for Australian TV. It feels like an amazing making of, because it's narrated by Kenneth Branagh, and that obviously brings this sort of heft to it. But it's really just a local news crew that came out to shoot the casting process of this. And while they were, hundreds of Aboriginal girls being cast in a Hollywood movie, like it was big news locally. So they came out to shoot that, and then they kind of hung in there for the training and the pre-production. The rehearsals, obviously, for this were huge, because getting these girls ready for these moments, teaching them how to perform in front of a camera, and teaching them how to get to some emotionally dark places without completely losing themselves. Like, all of that is stuff that it takes even the most refined actors some time to sort out in their lives. Some of them never even completely do it. So these completely inexperienced, never been on a TV show before girls had to be trained to all this. And Noyce, as they say in the doc, Philip's a white fella. Which he totally is.
Yeah.
But he was wise enough to say, well, here's what we have to do. And he asked the Aboriginal community, the tribal leaders, and all the people that he knew, any actors that he knew, how do we do this right? How do we do this the right way? You have to help me, because I know where we need to get, but I'm not sure about all that. And they gave him a lot of credit for that. This white fella, who was concerned about that every step of the way. But he brought in an acting coach who was a very famous Australian actor called Rachel Mazza. She is amazing in this documentary, the way she works with these girls. She's got a very small, acting coach miscellaneous credit in the film. But I was telling Joel before the show started, she's really the co-director of the film. She's with these girls all the time. She's keeping them focused on the job at hand during the long waits in between setups and other things. And she's making sure that they're ready to nail it when it happens. There's the abduction scene, which they shot very near the end of shooting, is incredible. And somehow more incredible is watching the shooting of it, which just shows you what a powerful thing it is. The scene in the movie is fantastic, because there's all these weird and unexpected and natural things happen with these girls. One of them just freezes on, which is a legit reaction to what is going on. I don't know if she's directed to do that or what, but it's very, very powerful. And Jason Clarke has to just be absolutely cruel in the scene, which I don't know how many times they shot it. Not many, I think, because when we see the making of, which is all kind of shown in one go, everything that you see in that scene in the movie takes place in this one take.
Yeah.
So I don't think they put these girls through this very often. He's like saying, if you move an inch, I'm going to put your mother in jail or whatever. And the lead girl in it, she's 13 years old, I think. She's like, he's trying to get her in this Model T car that they're going to drive off to this camp in. And she's kicking the door and she's putting her feet out, just struggling for her life. It's an extremely powerful thing to see. They all sort of break down completely. The women playing the mothers, who before the scene are kind of smoking cigarettes and talking about the craft of acting with these news people. And to see them just moments later, just husks of humanity. And the girls are crying and acting coach is crying. And Philip is holding everybody on the crew back just to leave them the hell alone, which again is this kind of wonderful.
Yeah.
I just saw it. I just saw what this is. And these people are the ones who felt it. And we're all going to just stay out of their way for a little bit. It's just one of the most powerful things I've ever seen in the making of. And I advise everybody, I don't know how, it's not in the DVD, I guess. I don't know how see.
It looks like it's available on YouTube.
Following the Rabbit Proof Fence.
Following the Rabbit Proof Fence. Looks like it's available on YouTube. The Australian original Aboriginal documentary.
For a limited time, you
sorry,
can save
hold
big
on. I know
5G
we're hearing
Samsung
a commercial.
phones.
Hold
Like
on.
Galaxy Z Flip 3
Yeah, it looks like the whole thing's here.
They say, this is where you insert your nickels now.
Yeah. No, it's here. The whole 45-minute thing. Yeah, it's on here.
You have to see the movie for the documentary really to work, and you do kind of have to see it in that order. So, but I just strongly recommend both. If you've seen Rabbit Proof Fence, dive into that doc. It's a short, like I say, it's a short news segment, but it's really wonderful and kind of amazing. And the film itself is one of my favorites ever. And so I just sort of kind of like wanted to take a few moments. I took way too long actually to give that a shout out. Well, of course I did, but got to fit a deep dive in. So we better move on.
Yeah. Along those same lines, this horrible moment in history and something, this historical drama. I've been watching Hawkeye on Disney Plus. So very similar.
Least watched Disney Plus Marvel TV series today.
It's really good. More people should be watching it. If you are,
well,
if you like the Marvel
they
films.
say that and then make big deal out of it. We're going to talk about a couple of cases where, again, where the headlines are just the wrong thing. Yeah, right. Only 10 trillion people are watching Hawkeye, whereas 13 trillion watched,
WandaVision,
Loki or whatever. It's like, come on.
Yeah.
Marvel fans, it's going to end someday. You're going to get sick of this stuff and it's going to go away. This is not what movies are going to be for the next 30 years. And what we're left with the day that happens, like what's left over, it's going to be rubble. So be getting ready for that. But I don't think Hawkeye's the beginning of the end. You're saying it's really good.
It's, for this character that was probably, one of the most overlooked and not really, cared about characters. It really is, and Jeremy Renner, I go hot and cold with him. He's really good.
He's really goofy guy in life.
Yeah.
I think he's a fantastic actor. Actually.
Yeah, he really is. He's really great. And, I will say, as someone who takes inclusion for people with disabilities in art very seriously, that is a very important part of this show so far, and that's really fascinating to me.
Well, and not only is the is representation a part of the show, but they all took a couple of weeks as a group, as a crew, and as a cast to learn basic ASL. So they just the basics, so they're not having probably really complex conversations, but so that to make the people feel comfortable and to have a set where everybody was communicating, where the deaf character, the deaf actor, whatever it be, isn't just doesn't just go off into the corner with their interpreter and just stay there until the next thing happens. They've all experienced some version of that, and I think it's a very cool behind the scenes story that they made sure that everybody had a basis for communicating the basics with somebody who was going to be an important part of the show. I think
that's what I've been watching Hawkeye and the Wheel of Time series on Amazon, because I like those books a lot, and that they're fun. It's good. That's good bubblegum TV.
It's hard to call 900-page books in a 10-book series fun. That is a massive chore from hell for somebody who doesn't read that much. So just before you start tackling the Wheel of Time based on, it's fun. Just look ahead and see what you're getting into.
It is. I mean, it's for people who thought that George R.R. Martin or James Tolkien, if they felt like they glossed over too many things, they really should they should give Robert Jordan's Wheel of Time series a go. But it's really good. I love the idea behind it was Bezos literally said to his Amazon Studios people, make Game of Thrones look like crap, and gave them all this money to do it. And so far
they have all the money.
Yeah, it's pretty, and it's it's fun. It's good. It's a good time.
It's better value than rocket ships to the moon. I'll tell you that.
I would say that. Yeah. Speaking of Game of Thrones, one of the other things that we're going to talk a little bit about a couple tidbits in the news. There was there was all this talk. There's been talk, even before the final season, what HBO do some sort of spin-off series? Would they, what would they create? They got to keep this story going somehow because it's so popular.
Well, Game of Thrones was for HBO was the thing. It was the most watched. It didn't start out that way. It was just another expensive, like Rome or like what's the Gold Rush one, the Western, can't remember. Really good.
Deadwood.
Yeah, Deadwood. Sorry, Michael. Deadwood. It started out like that, but obviously by the end of it, it was the biggest thing on the planet. And we have to keep that going, or the subscribers are going to go away. And then they did. I mean, they really did by the millions when Game of Thrones ended. Mm-hmm. So the idea being, well, it's this giant world. We got the author. We got all these options for these other stories to tell. They had a whole bunch of in development, and they basically said, don't get too excited. Not all of these are going to happen. We're starting the dominoes, but some of them are going to kind of stop. But one of them, and it's kind of funny. The only thing that's news is what it actually cost. That news came out. Otherwise, this is ancient news. It really is. This happened. They shot this pilot, had Naomi Watts in it. It did take place. It doesn't have a name, but it does take place during the Age of Heroes in old Valyria. And it presumably leads to the fall of Valyria. And in Game of Thrones, while keeping it short, Valyria is essentially Rome. If you're going to compare it to something in our own Western history of Western civilization. Yeah. And, it's where the dragons first were. It's where the dragons go home to when they are free themselves. So it's a meaningful and magical place. But the pilot didn't really come together. They shot the whole thing, and when they saw the first rough cut of it, they just agreed. This isn't working. We need to cut our losses here. So the only thing that's news now is this $30 million bill, which apparently people are. Again, I don't know where that comes from. People are making a really big deal about that amount of money on a wasted pilot, but that's nothing to HBO, as absolutely nothing to Jeff Bezos. Jeff Bezos, if he met you on the street, could write you out a check for $30 million. And from a tax standpoint, he'd probably profit by doing so. It's just not, I think you need to not compare with these it's corporations that run our entertainment now. You can go back not too far in time to something like Rabbit Proof Fence and see where it was otherwise. But that is how it is now. $30 million is nothing. So the schadenfreude value of the story is kind of pointless. The only
Right.
thing I would say that's tragic about it's not that some cajillionaire with too much money lost $30 million. It's that, you know, they were going to do a series about Old Valyria, and now they're not going to do one, and they probably won't try one again. And that, I think, for people steeped in Game of Thrones lore, is kind of sad. But it's kind of like whatever. They even said at the time, one of the executives came on. He said, "Yeah, you know, we were going through a time where we had money just falling out of the thing and not a plan to go forward. And a lot of the things we did during that era were extremely wasteful." And somebody finally came in and said, you know, we shouldn't be wasteful, even if we have all the money in the world, just out of principle. It's not helping us create good art. And I think that's wise. And I think it's smart that they sort of changed gears. But when you see the $30 million price tag and you see on all these OMGs in the comments sections, I'm kind of like, y'all need to really reevaluate what these things are costing these days.
I guess I can't, you know, it feels, again, I don't want to be conspiracy theorist, or it feels like also though that it's sort of being done to just because they do have what is it, Age of the Dragons or whatever,
Dance of Dragons,
whatever the one that is called, House of the Dragon. That's what it is.
House of the Dragon.
House of the Dragon
takes place during the Targaryen Civil War.
Yeah. And so they have that one going forward. So like you said, they had a bunch of projects that they were like, well, we could look at this and we could maybe go down this road and we could do this, because George R.R. Martin has all these, he has, all these different books that take place in the world of Game of Thrones. I don't know. There's just something about it that it feels like it was put out there. It's just something to, I don't know, somehow when this new one comes out, they'll be able to talk about, well, this is what made it through when they spent 30 million on one, so this better be good. If they spent 30 million and scrapped it, well, what did they spend on
the final season? The final season of Game of Thrones, the episodes cost about 50 million each.
Yeah.
So it just, when you're starting from scratch, I don't know how much the Wheel of Time first episode costs, or the Lord of the Rings one is costing, but I can just promise you it's millions and millions and millions of dollars.
Yeah.
So yeah, this one failed, but pilots fail sometimes. Game of Thrones' own pilot completely failed and got cut. And it was only by kind of a miracle that they were allowed to try another one. So, and I can promise you that cost some millions of dollars too. Yep. For our audience, you guys probably already know our philosophy on this, but just in general, just get your eyes off the millions. Yeah. You know, if you want to pay attention to what millions of dollars are spent on, go look at the defense budget. Don't be fussing over what the Amazing Spider-Man movies cost, or shouldn't be a primary part of the way you approach the storytelling that you choose to fill your life with. I really don't
culturally we've become we tend to associate how much money something costs with its actual value, with it being good, or people being behind it, people's belief in it. I think it is more than just it costs this much so it's awesome. They really thought this was going to be awesome, or they wouldn't have made this kind of investment. And millions and millions of dollars, they do make a difference in how these studios function. So don't get me wrong. Yeah, I mean, we've even said like maybe once or twice on this show, we're like, oh, if only they had like another $1 million, they could have invested in this post-production thing.
What's the next story? The next story leads right into this
correct.
Same line
Yes,
of
it do. Yes, I do. We were going to talk about The Last Duel, the Ridley Scott film, with Matt Damon, Ben Affleck, and Hunky Man Meat,
Adam
Driver, and and Ridley Scott was on the Mark Maron podcast,
because he has House of Gucci coming off. Talk about 2 movies in the same year. Good Lord.
And he was asked about the fact that The Last Duel underperformed. And Mark Maron was like, well, was that the studio not do enough to promote it? And Ridley Scott's like, no, the Ridley studio was great.
Had a caveat. He said, so I've been doing movies with Fox my whole career primarily. Mm-hmm. And I thought the Disney people wouldn't get into this and wouldn't sell it, or, would sell it as something it's not. But he said they got all the way behind it. They hard sold it. He thought they sold it for what it was and gave you a fair expectation of what you were going to get. So he said, I got no problem with what the studio did.
Yeah.
What was his problem, Joel?
His quote. I'll read the quote here. I'm going to censor the F-bomb that he drops, but he says, I think what it boils down to, this is quote Ridley Scott, I think what it boils down to, what we've got today, the audiences who were brought up on these effing cell phones. The millennials do not ever want to be taught anything unless you are told it on the cell phone. This is broad stroke, but I think we're dealing with it right now with Facebook. There is a misdirection that has happened where it's given the wrong kind of confidence to this latest generation, I think. Wrong
kind of confidence. I love that.
Yeah, the wrong kind of confidence. And he goes on, he talks about and he talks about like back in, when Blade Runner came out, he blamed Pauline Kael for this article that she wrote on it, this review in New Yorker, and that thing, he felt that it really
literally turned off lots of the thoughtful audience that was out there that eventually found their way to this movie at that time in a very key way. She was a terrible critic. People really love her, but I can't stand her.
She was horrible. She was not good.
She's a really good writer. So she had a really lot of power, and she wrote obviously for one of the most well-read rags ever. So she's a legend. But as a movie critic, you start quoting her and you find very little wisdom, and you find very little, what's the word we use all the time? Clarity. It's all about her sort of snark and her sort of New York sarcasm It became not about a review of the movie. It became what is her, she became the story. It's Pauline Kael's review of it. And so you're reading, she becomes the story. Yeah. I mean, she was one of those that if you ever, she's a very good writer. And if you ever that's
wanted
undeniable,
to know,
even if you don't like her, which I don't.
Yeah. And I was going to say, and if you ever wanted to know how good of a writer she is, just ask her. But yeah, so poor good old Ridley, he's kind of.
Yeah, I'm sure Maron was eating that up because he's no fan of superhero movies either at all. Him and Bill Maher probably are the two guys out there that are most outspoken against our current sort of tops in the entertainment world. Yeah. And look, I'll say the same thing about this. Ridley's not wrong, but I think it's not fair of him to. We do it on the show. Millennials, Gen Z. I read this great post from Not a Wolf on TV. He's my favorite. He's the only sort of weird fake personality he said, one thing Gen Z will never understand is my specific emotions and experiences. And of course, that's we all pitted against each other. That's too bad. But that is how the generations operate. So, Joel and I are dyed in the wool Gen Xers all the way. So you get a certain perspective from us. And as much as we may, shed that occasionally and do something unexpected, we are sort of trapped in that way of looking at the world. So I don't blame the millennials, but I will tell you that just from a theatrical release standpoint, it's the same thing. They were trying to the Bond movie, No Time to Die, came out around the same time. And that movie making about $900 million worldwide. And that's not much for a Bond movie, but it's more than any other movie released this past year. So it is number one globally. And they're trying to sort of paint it like, well, it cost a ton, which it did, like it's some sort of bomb. They're trying to stick it with something. They're throwing dirt at it to see what sticks. And if something does, everything's going to pile on it. The reality is Ridley, and it's time that maybe your budgets reflect this. Because I think last Duel, which I haven't seen, House of Gucci, probably both really great. They look good, and I'm excited for both of them. I'm excited for the final Bond movie. in a more measured way, but I'm still really excited for it because we're big Bond fans around here, as you know.
We are. I don't know if people know this. We did a couple episodes on James Bond.
We, Generation X, didn't go out to see these movies.
Yeah.
The baby boomers didn't go out to see them. That's key. We're the ones who could have made Last Duel a hit, and we're the ones that could have made No Time to Die a massive hit. No Time to Die got us out a little bit, but only a little portion of us, not enough to make it a big, super, mega global hit the way they wanted. And so I really think it's just, with respect to millennials on their phones, if that's really a thing, Gen Z on their phone, it's really us. This is a bad time for us. We don't want to go to the movies.
Right.
You know, we don't trust the other people sitting in the movie with us for 2.5 hours to do the right thing. We don't want to stand in the lobby. We don't want to be touching the same stuff in the public bathroom. I mean, this is the world, and it sucks. But if you look at it that way, then Last Duel actually did okay, and No Time to Die did amazing, because the people who these things are targeted to aren't out there yet.
Yeah,
they just aren't. So
that's the takeaway. Is you're right. It's
the people who are going to see movies. The youth of America, they're not into Last Time to Die.
They're not going to go into Last Duel. Those movies were made for these two guys right
Whether
here. Whether
Ridley knows it or not, he's in his late 70s or whatever. He should know better by now.
Yeah, boomer. Yeah, boomer Ridley.
I'm not dissing him. I loved that.
We love Ridley
Scott. That was really fun, and I think there's a real kernel of truth in what he's saying. But I think there's this other pragmatic part of it where, they didn't like it or didn't even want to try it. We did, but we didn't go. That's the world you're in. And when you're planning your release schedule, think about that a little bit, probably at this point. Although don't think about it too much, because I lament the loss of days when Last Duel gets a big marketing push and a big theatrical release. I still want those sorts of projects to break through. But that's my take on that.
Yeah. One last little, well, not little, but we posted about it on our social media, and it's been all over the news, and
we got a lot of reactions to it. Thank you for that. That's nice.
Yeah.
It's nice to be able to share these moments with others. That's part of the whole deal of this.
The one of the giants of American theater passed away this past week. Stephen Sondheim, at the age of 91, prolific writer and composer, and the scourge of many a musical theater performer, because he is one of the most it's advanced. It's like
singing math. One of the actors once said. It's
advanced musical theater. It is. This is a guy who would solve math theorems for fun, and did take a very mathematical approach. But in that approach, ultimately, once you started to perform Sondheim and once you started singing him with regularity, you discovered that all of it was designed to make your singing sound more conversational. So once you got into it, that's why so many of his, Into the Woods, some of it flows really quickly. Ryan and I were lucky a gajillion years ago to be in a production of Assassins in college. It was really, it was just a mind-blowing show.
Yes, Sweeney Todd, Sunday in the Park with George, A Little Night Music, Company. List goes on and on. It's just he's Into the Woods. Definitely, I think of the more recent people, that's a really significant show. Assassin certainly was for us. So he started just writing lyrics with his mentor, Leonard Bernstein. He wrote the lyrics for the West Side Story, among others. And that, of course, it's fitting that Spielberg's West Side Story is coming out in a few weeks. And that musicals, you know, Annie was on a couple nights ago on NBC. Annie, who doesn't love? If you don't love Annie, you know, just check your heart. Check your heart.
Annie had
Go
good
to a heart
moments.
specialist.
Here's what I'll say. Annie was good despite the efforts of many of the people on camera.
Well, these TV music, live TV musicals, I haven't seen a good one yet.
Oh yeah, it was tough.
But I love them. I love them anyway.
Me too.
You know, I love them because I love that there's something about them. It's ballsy to do a live event on television, to tell any sort of live story, and then to add the music, song and dance aspect to it. To me, that's really exciting. So I didn't watch Annie, you know, whatever. I was watching football, but I love it. I hope they keep doing that, despite the fact that they all aren't good. You know, Sound of Music wasn't very good.
No, yeah,
Peter Pan wasn't very good, and Rent was terrible.
Rent was terrible.
These shows
Jesus
are
Christ
all good,
Superstar was all right. Yeah,
they weren't right, but I still keep up the good work.
Yeah, keep trying. Eventually, eventually one of these maybe will become
in our year-end episodes. We're going to talk about In the Heights. We're going to talk about Tick Tick Boom, about Jonathan Larson. Those, we have all that coming. It's a good era. I've said, and I keep saying it, and I'll probably keep saying it even after I see it. I don't understand why Spielberg threw all his late career weight behind West Side Story, because there's already a perfect movie version of West Side Story. That's my only issue with it, because I'm sure, because he's exactly the right guy for the material. And I mean, I'm sure it's going to be glorious. It's getting pretty rave reviews. I still am kind of like, geez, you had a chance to make your movie musical, you know, you just had to pick one that didn't already win all the Oscars, you know? So, but I'm still excited to see that, because it's West Side Story. And, you know, I just saw a couple summers ago, I saw Joel in West Side Story. It's glorious. It was wonderful.
It was, you know, that's
West Side Story has its challenges, but it never gets bad. You know what I'm saying? It's good.
And I'm still working on it. Hopefully, maybe having a cast member of Steven Spielberg's
West Side Story on the show.
West Side Story.
She as Anita in your version of the Guthrie's version of West Side Story. She's spectacular. Just knocked me out. Just knocked me out from the word go. And what do we always say? Without, you know, Anita's allowed to steal the show, really, when it's her big moments, but she's not allowed to when it's not her big moments. Yeah, she's through the whole show, and she was just dynamite whilst not being an obnoxious scene stealing actor. And to me, that's the magic of live theater for sure, but of cinema too. We've said it time and time again.
Yeah, Anna Isabel, and she also has a spectacular story of how she booked the movie. So
I've heard it. I'm hoping we need to hear from her own ears.
Yeah, I'm hoping
but if we don't, here's our second shout out to her, because she is really awesome. So
she's great, and it's super exciting to have a friend in this movie. Stephen Sondheim passing. I mean, it is. I mean, modern musicals are what they are. There would be no Hamilton without Stephen Sondheim. There would be no I'm trying to think of some of the other Come From Away, that none, you know, that Pasek and Paul, Bench Pasek and I can't remember it there, but they're the toast du jour of musical theater right now.
Gypsy's the other movie you wrote the lyrics for.
Yeah, Gypsy's the other, and you know, none of the composers coming through right now would be where they are, or you know, the kind of musicals that we're getting right now, the subject matter of the musicals that we're getting now, we would not have that without
very
Stephen Sondheim.
Experimental subject matter all throughout his career, truly.
Yeah. So
you still have Cats and Phantom of the Opera, so don't feel too bad. But
we would, and we would have some you know, there'd be some French Revolutionary stuff out there, still
out there, but his influence on American musical theater can't be quantified. Truly, he really is amazing. And no small. He made quite a dent in the world of film as well. Truly, not just in the adaptations of his musicals, but the songs from Dick Tracy, and you can just kind of go back through time, and it's those songs of his, and that stuff is sprinkled throughout films as long as he's been doing music, and we're just very grateful for him. And he was an old man, and he lived a brilliant self-actualized life, so we don't mourn him so much as we really do. It's a good time to celebrate him.
You know, and here's the deal. We're also going to get new music from him. He was working right up until he passed away. So, you know, there's still potentially some new Sondheim music that we'll get to experience, and that which will always be, you know, it's always be interesting. Some of it is not awesome. The second act of Into the Woods is not great. The musical Passion, not awesome, but enough of what
not a big fan of Passion, but that's whatever.
Yeah. But so much of what he created, just spectacular. But yeah, so we mentioned West Side Story coming out with Stephen Sondheim. Next up, we are going to take something of a mini deep dive. It kind of makes me want to, I wish I could like just speed up our fanfare. So it'd be like, deep dive. But I should have thought of that beforehand.
Speeding up of the fanfares.
But we are going to talk about a movie produced by Steven Spielberg. And which it's fun to talk about. It's a fun movie. It's young Sherlock Holmes, and it is also responsible for one of the funniest text messages Ryan has sent me in a very long time.
Can't wait to hear what that was.
Well, it was when we were trying to come up with ideas for this show. But anyway, we are going to get into it. It is a deep dive on young Sherlock Holmes.
I have to do a deep dive.
Deep dive. Deep dive.
I have to do a deep dive.
Deep dive. Deep dive.
Do a deep dive.
Deep dive. Deep dive. Deep dive.
Have to do a deep dive.
Scarlett Johansson from Ghost in the Shell. That's what that is. I've said that wrong like 2 or 3 times throughout the
show, really?
So. I never got Christopher Cross mixed up with Krista Berg, though, so I'm not a complete idiot like Joel. But I have been misattributing that because I can't spit out what it is. Unfortunately, that's from Ghost in the Shell.
Look,
you can skip that one.
I'm not saying I don't remember making that mistake. I'm sure I did.
You did.
But
when we were talking about Christopher Cross, you made a Woman in Red reference. That's not right.
That's right. You're right.
Okay.
Busted.
I have the proof. It's on tape.
I believe you.
I feel like I hurt your feelings for real. I didn't.
Well, no, because I was like, when did I do that? That seems like I said, I believe
you. I meant to gently tease you, not to send you reeling into some.
I'm spiraling now. I'm spiraling. No.
Sorry.
Oh no! What did I do? All right.
Young Sherlock Holmes.
Young Sherlock Holmes. Again, Young Sherlock Holmes. Directed by Barry Levinson. Produced by Steven Spielberg and that group they're not the main. They're part of the producing team.
No, they're the producing. They're the main thing. There was a time in the early 80s, and it came to fruition in 1984, big time. It sort of started. I mean, we could go all the way back and talk about Amblin Entertainment and Steven Spielberg's producing on the side, but he produced as many big, iconic 80s hits as he directed.
Yeah.
At least as many, maybe slightly more on the producing side. It started, of course, with Poltergeist. We won't get into that, but it definitely executive produced in a major way by Spielberg. And And the big one in '84 for him was written by this kid, Chris Columbus, called Gremlins.
Yeah.
And I'm not a big Gremlins fan. Joel likes it a little better than me, but he didn't really love it either. So we don't really talk about it very much on the show for a rather iconic film from our childhood. The next movie that he did, Spielberg loved the Gremlin script. It was a big hit. He had this idea for this treasure hunt movie that he sort of gave the outline to Columbus, and Columbus then wrote the Goonies.
Oh God, what did I do? Weird. That's usually our sound to make a mistake, but we did not make a mistake. I bumped my mouse. I bumped my trackpad there, and it triggered.
Well, we can just use that for the Krista Berg debacle.
There we go.
And then we can call that finished and really put that behind us, because I really didn't know that was going to be such a sore spot. Different Christopher, Chris Columbus. Now we're talking about.
Yeah, I'm terribly sorry for that.
He wrote the Goonies, which again was a huge hit. So Columbus had a dream project that he wanted to do, which was this idea that Sherlock Holmes and John Watson met in boarding school as children and solved a mystery together. And Spielberg's like, yes, do that. That's great. That sounds great. That sounds just like the movie everyone will love. And we're on this hot streak, so let's do it. It actually came out later in 1985 than the Goonies. So they were making these and writing these all at the same time. And Chris Columbus, went on to be more famous for Mrs. Doubtfire and just this whole list of mediocre, sort of mainstream, stupid comedies. He directed directed into the ground almost the first two Harry Potter films. He's not like a terrible filmmaker, but he started out as this hotshot screenwriter. Truly, he was writing one family PG-13 hit after another, and this was sort of the third one, and this was the one he was really, really excited about doing. And I have to say, it's a neat idea. When I pitched the idea just now, it excites me too. It's really, really cool, and the movie's not half bad. I'm going to be a little harder on it, I think, than Joel, even though I'm a kind of fan of it, definitely. It's really weird, and it's really oddly prophetic in a lot of ways. I call it the nexus with which all sort of post Generation X, 80s and 90s movies spring from and cross through, because there's so many things that it does that all these other films did in the future. And there's so many weird ways it affected future Sherlock Holmes lore, whether consciously, unconsciously, or just simply coincidentally. And it's fun to talk about, because when those things spring up, you're like, oh, wow. Oh, yeah. Part of it was Columbus was a huge Sherlock Holmes fan, read every story multiple times. He was absolutely terrified that there were two hurdles he had to get over. One, he had to get the Arthur Conan Doyle estate, which is still run in a rather serious way by his descendants, to agree to let him do it. And then the second thing is, when he did it, he had to not offend all of the Sherlock Holmes fans out there in the world. The first thing he managed, with an absurd amount of caveats attached from any movie I think I've ever seen. I've never seen the same disclaimer 3 times in the same movie.
Right. Yeah.
We're going to read each of them to you as we go through this, because they're funny. All of them are funny and wonderful in their own way. But it's an odd meeting. My first 3 chapters of my deep dive here are Amblin, which is Steven Spielberg, 1492, which is Chris Columbus's production company, and the third, which Joel's already mentioned, is Baltimore Productions, which is Barry Levinson. Barry Levinson is the weirdest choice for this material that I can think of. This is such a weird work, and just stand out like zit on the tip of your nose of his career. And I don't want to just use negative terms, because it's not a bad movie. It's certainly not a badly directed movie, but it's so odd. There's nothing of Levinson in it except a cameo from this actor that appears in all of his movies. Without that guy, I don't think you'd even know I just don't think you'd even know. This film feels like it was directed by Chris Columbus, to be honest. And I guess that's just Levinson.
Yeah.
He's one of those directors who's got this amazing sort of career, but he's one of the ones I'm kind of hard on because he's not a writer. And because he's not a writer, he's an absolute slave to the script that he's working on every time he sets out to do a project, in a way that Spielberg and Ridley Scott managed to sort of manipulate the writing to fit a vision. Barry Levinson, really, if he starts with a bad script, you get a bad movie. And if he starts with a great one, you get a pretty great one. And there's no real in between. And he's another guy who, despite him starting as a writer, so I shouldn't say he's not a writer. He, like Columbus, started out as a screenwriter and then just stopped writing once he got directing gigs. Mm-hmm. He had a writing partner. Maybe she was doing the heavy lifting in the early days. I'm not sure. But he wrote Inside Moves and he wrote like a bunch of scripts early on. And now he doesn't. And I don't understand that. But anyway, Barry Levinson, this is a weird way to bring him into the show because it is a total outlier on his filmography. But it's still pretty good. What's the chapter that I haven't gotten to? Is the first disclaimer? Are we up to that?
Sure. One thing I want to, because I don't see it in your thing at all, in your outline at all, but is bringing up the fact that Henry Winkler is also a producer on this. Which
started producing with this film and with MacGyver in the same year. Watched
so
the same year.
It was it was just sort of like, is that it? As I started watching it again, Jennifer, my wife, walked by. She's like, "Did that just say Henry Winkler?" And I'm like, "Yes, it did. Yes, it did."
Well, and he was a big time producer on this. I mean, he was kind of the big time producer on it in a way. Whereas Spielberg kind of oversaw certain things and stuff, and was the exec behind it, and was the Steven Spielberg Presents, and it's very Spielbergian, very Spielbergian. Yeah. Same way Goonies is, even though it's a Richard Donner film. Same way Gremlins is, frankly, even though it's a Joe Dante film. It's very, very Spielbergian. Maybe even more so than those other two. More Spielbergian than even Goonies, which Steven wrote. Yeah. Henry Winkler, that's worth mentioning. Although Henry Winkler being a super producer for the 80s isn't news. That's what he did. That's why he didn't appear in anything. He didn't see... Thankfully, the page, like it does if you're patient enough, Ed O'Neill, some of these guys, he really didn't see the Fonz. He just didn't see anybody giving them any kind of work. And yet he was sort of a smart show business guy and got into producing, and he produced some very successful things. So good on him, I have to say.
Absolutely. All right. So next up is the pre-prologue Arthur Conan Doyle estate disclaimer number 1.
Go for it.
It says, so we get in this great gold, this lovely font that the whole opening credits is done in. The following story is original and not specifically based on the exploits of Sherlock Holmes as described in the works of Sir Arthur Conan Doyle.
Thanks for that.
Thanks.
Just make sure. Good.
Just make sure
that the audience who might think Doyle wrote this, he didn't. Mm-hmm. He actually, there is a scene in Arthur Conan Doyle's canon of Watson and Sherlock meeting for the first time, so they couldn't have met as tweens in boarding school. What's in that title of the next chapter? Help me out.
God rest you, merry gentlemen. We're going to talk about Bruce Broughton's score.
So the movie starts with God rest you, merry gentlemen, and a dude sort of walking the streets of London. It's a great use of London sets. Today, if you're going to shoot, if you're going to make a movie in London, you probably go to Prague because all the buildings feel like that age and everything. This film they shot in England with a mostly English crew, even though the big wigs were all Americans, and an entirely English cast. Good on them. But they just, something about it. A big part of the winningness of this film is the atmosphere, the Christmassy, snowy London atmosphere, Victorian England. It's, I say in a future chapter, it's very, very Dickensian. It really does feel like you're about to watch Christmas Carol. Yeah, it has that sense of it. Bruce Broughton is one of my favorite film composers, and I haven't done that many movies I don't know if he's just not in favor. I don't know how he couldn't be. Perhaps he's a little bit too musical. Certainly he is for today's movies, but Broughton to me will always be immortalized forever in the musical score for the Western Silverado. I think that with respect to Ennio Morricone, with respect to Elmer Bernstein, I really believe Silverado has the best Western score ever committed to film. I just adore it. I adore every note of it. And this film, again, came out later the same year. So this really was him at his apex, even though it was also him sort of being introduced to the world of big cinema. But the musical score for Young Sherlock Holmes is extraordinary. It's Silverado. It's like Silverado in a way. Silverado's got 2 or 3 themes. It's actually got like a half dozen, but it sticks to 2 or 3 in a way that the director of that film, Lawrence Kasdan, wanted. And that lesson is carried over into this film. The film's got a lot of musical variations. Characters have a lot of different sort of underscoring bits and stuff, but there's a couple of big John Williams like thematic things that it sticks to. One is this twiddly sort of, it's a mystery. What's happening? It's, blah, 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 blah. Yeah. And that sort of carries through the film. And the other is this, it's Spielberg. We're flying through the crowds and the trees. This huge, bombastic, like heroic, like just magic of youth sort of free song. It's just really wonderful.
It's almost Sherlock Holmes flying past the moon in silhouette.
Very much. It really is. I mean, it really does sweep you off your feet in a wonderful way. Did you know, Joel, that Amblin logo where E.T. flies across the moon, actually, it's usually shown in silence or with the trail end of the film score fading out? That actually has a theme song. And this is one of 3 movies where if you stay all the way to the end, you get to hear it with John Williams' little thing that he wrote.
The little. It's almost. I did stay. And,
it's E.T. related music.
It's a little flying theme. Yeah, it's a little flying theme-esque.
Mostly we see that Amblin logo without music or sans that theme. In the early days, they played it like everything else. They had a little fanfare for it. They played it.
Yep.
It's at the end of the film with a bunch of other weird stuff. Including a third disclaimer. It's cool. You can feel that. You can feel the excitement of Columbus's working on this project that he really believed in, but you can also feel that reverence for the character and for the there's that sense of, God, I hope this is okay that I did this. That's very much a part of this. So, but Bruce Broughton's music, I dare I say it is the best thing about. It's the best single production element about Young Sherlock Holmes. It completely elevates it and makes it feel like it's much, much more special than it really is when you take it apart into pieces. And that's, to be fair, that's what a great score should do. And I don't think Young Sherlock Holmes is considered a great score, but it is. It's really is really, really good.
Yeah, the music is really terrific in this film.
We took for granted that at the time in 1985 because every score was like this during that era.
Yeah, and they
aren't anymore. So when you go back and you hear one that's really special, it sort of knocks you out.
And I sort of feel like there's a scene coming up, and I'm like, did John Williams, take a listen a little bit to Young Sherlock Holmes for
something in the future
for Temple of Doom?
Well, Temple of Doom came first.
Oh, did it?
Yes, but we'll get to the Temple of Doom because this film has a Temple of Doom in it as well.
Yes, it does. All right. So
we'll get to that when we get to it, but you're not wrong about that.
Yeah. So we talked about it being Dickensian, and that was the next chapter title.
Is it? Well, it is. It's weird because Dickens and Doyle aren't exactly associated with one another, but it is very Dickensian, and as proof, I plucked the invented the non-Doyle character names out of the script and Joel's going to read them for you now.
Mrs. Drib, Rupert T. Waxflatter, Master Snellgrove, Chester Cragwitch. Your name is Chester Cragwitch. Bentley Bobster. I love Bentley Bobster. And the Reverend Duncan Nesbitt. And Old Curio Shop.
There's an old curio shop in it, of course. There's a whole novel of Dickens called The Old Curiosity Shop. So the Dickens isn't happening by accident, which is good. He's not just subconsciously stealing these things. He's taking the time to pay a little tribute to him too. And those character names, I mean, they are really Dickensian in a great way. Very memorable.
And
you are Chester Cragwitch.
You are Chester Cragwitch. Your name is Chester Criggles. What's that? What's his name?
So it's very Dickensian in a lovely way. It's, you know, I that's why I like it. That's why we talk about it at this time of year and not in the summer, because it starts out with God Rest You Merry Gentlemen, and it's very ghosts aren't in it, but there's still this like host of Scrooges that are the murder victims in this.
Here you go.
Yep. And
number 7, the next chapter is No, You're Not Hallucinating.
No, you're not. This is where me and young Sherlock Holmes start to depart a little bit. Maybe not so much when I was a kid, but the film is very famous for a stunning array of both animation effects, and it also contains the first major film sequence of a Pixar animated effect. There've been some shorts and some other little things where Pixar had made its mark up to this point, but this is the first big movie where a digitally animated thing was created by Pixar for Amblin Entertainment, and these characters. Again, this is a deep dive, and this is where we really are going to jump off the edge and start spoiling the hell out of young Sherlock Holmes. So if you haven't seen it and we've intrigued you, maybe come back to this part later, because here we go. The characters in the story are all shot with a dart that has a poison in it that makes them hallucinate to the point that they basically take their own lives in all sorts of horrific ways. The opening sequence, the pre-title sequence, is a sequence of this old rich Victorian London bachelor guy who goes out to have dinner, and his pheasant that he's about to eat attacks him. And then when he goes home, his like wardrobe starts coming to life. And, you know, if you lived in Victorian England, there were gargoyles everywhere. Your door knocker,
birds,
there's literally stuff that if they were alive could start biting you and attacking you and eating you. So the film makes good use of that, but it's all a little literal. You know, I wish that if in the hands of a better director, I think that these hallucination sequences would be a little more nightmarish and a little less just animated and cartoonish. And a couple of them are close. A couple of them get there, or at least get a part of the way there. But this opening one, which is really important, isn't. This is really the cheesiest one, where all the different animals come together to get this guy with his hunting trophy and whatever, and he throws himself out his window and dies on the street in the snow.
Yeah.
And these similar sorts of these guys, maybe they have a connection. I don't know. We'll figure it out. That's how the thing starts. It starts with the first murder, basically, and it's weird.
Well, and
say that.
Yeah, it's weird. I mean, and you know, I will say that you know, one of the things that I did dig about the, you know, it's like you have this hooded, mysterious figure walking around, you know, and at a time when you want, you know, if you were an assassin or if you're a killer and you're going around, obviously you would think that you would want to be quiet. But this person always is wearing some sort of jingly bell, and loves the fact that they're wearing a jingly bell, because it's like that's the only thing you hear. And
you see the shadow and you hear the bell. That's right.
And
whatever, that part I don't mind. I think the movie is weird to roll out the massive effect sequence so early in the film.
Right.
If it's going to indeed roll them out at all, they're the thing that make this a 1985 Spielberg production where, and the movie, while good, and the Sherlock Holmes bits, while wonderful, never truly rise above these heavy effects sequences that exist in the thing. And I think they weigh them down in the end.
And this first sequence, this first animated sequence, it does it in a way. There are two very specific laugh moments in this at the very beginning, which tonally already, because it's all shadowy and, like you said, Dickensian, and he's walking through and it's snowing, and Mr. Bentley Bobster's walking through and blah, 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 looking, and get away from me, you urchins, and stuff like that. And then then he goes in and he orders his favorite little pheasant thing, and it's laying there. Let's see how I can do this. It's laying there, and then all of a sudden, like how the effect starts is the head comes up and looks at him. And it's like this moment, and it's kind of this moment. I'm assuming they wanted it to be kind of scary, but it's kind of funny. It looks like a bit that would be done in the Muppet Show. And then he has the I'm being attacked. And then all of a sudden everyone else that they show him, and he's just gasping at, grabbing at nothing and everything. And everyone's like, what is wrong with this guy? And
it doesn't help that we're shown the outsider's perspective of what's really happening either. I get that the movie's trying to communicate all this stuff, but this thing sucks the mystery out of it. I actually think a guy getting attacked by his pheasant he's about to eat is funny. I think the hat bit when he gets back to his apartment is funny too. That's a classic old bit, but it's by that point, this needs to be a murder sequence that we take a little bit seriously, and you never really do.
Agreed.
And that's too bad, but to me, that's the specifics of this heavy effect sequence. To me, the heavy effect sequence existing in the first place is the problem. It needs to be more suggestive, and it's very, very literal. That said, it's extremely accomplished effects work. It's really, really good stuff. Industrial Light and Magic's probably best work of 1985. It really is. They were very, very proud of it, and very sad that the movie it didn't bomb exactly, but it sort of came and went, and wasn't. It was sort of the end of their big run of kind of perfect films.
I mean, if it was bigger, they could be celebrating some of these other effects, and now it's just, well, this was our first fully CGI sequence in a major film. So,
and the first CGI sequence, I think we can talk about it now, because I don't think we're going to come back to hallucinations until we get to our hero is actually going through some. So, there's a couple other murders, but the other big one is the Pixar sequence where this priest, Reverend Nesbitt, is attacked by a knight in a stained glass window who jumps out of the wall and lands and walks down the aisle, like jingling like broken glass sort of at him. And he runs out into the street and gets hit by a carriage. But that effect is really amazing. And the camera even does a camera move around it. So you can see
it swings around. Yeah.
You can see that it's a one-dimensional glass thing, even though when it's coming at you, it looks like this real thing. It's really, really complicated effect sequence and really, really stunning. But again, not super scary. And it's just done and shot in a very straightforward way that highlight the effects at the expense sort of the scariness, or they scare these guys to death, basically.
Yeah. And here's what I'll say. The Reverend Duncan Nesbitt death is it really illustrates the fact that this could, how this was not a great way to assassinate these people, these poison darts. It's he's conveniently run over by a carriage. He could have easily gotten away And if you would have made it across that street, he would have ended up somewhere and probably would have, locked himself away somewhere. And eventually the poison would have wore off and he would have been fine.
The first three murders in the film, it's amazing how successful they are, given, like Joel says, how they really rely on a ton of convenience and good luck on behalf of our villains.
Mm-hmm.
In fact, it only takes another sober person's presence really to stop one from working later in the film. So it is stupid if you think too much about it. And that's a shame because it could be much simpler and much more effective. But look, Young Sherlock Holmes is for kids. I mean, it may be PG-13 and there's certainly violence in it, but it's for kids. They don't want to horrify you. They want you to be amused, a little perturbed, but amused by these sequences. They don't want you thinking too much about mortality or any of that stuff. And frankly, none of Chris Columbus's movies do. He's the king of high body counts that have very little emotional value during the course of a film. That's what he is as a writer. And that's what he's always been. And this film's more palatable than most, than Gremlins for sure. Yeah. Because it rides the balance better. And I think that's Levinson, who I'm ripping on a little bit, but I think he really gets what these have to be and just lets them be that and gets through them and allows them to be light without feeling like the film is making fun of these people. Mm-hmm. And that's not an easy tightrope to walk. And he does a pretty good job of it so that we can get back to our heroes, which we haven't even talked about yet. Sherlock Holmes is in this thing, Joel.
Yeah. Number 8. And I can get this out now. Number 8 is, dude, this is just like Harry Potter.
Well, let me give you the setup. Okay.
Before we get into the setup, this is one of the funniest things that you've ever sent me when we were trying to come up with show ideas. You just, actually days had gone by and out of nowhere you wrote 10 ways young Sherlock Holmes is exactly like Harry Potter and the Sorcerer's Stone. I only have 6, but I'm convinced I'll find more. I just howled when you sent me that.
I didn't really find more, but boy, there's a lot of similarities. And it's weird because there is a connection. There's no Harry Potter in 1985. That's not even a dream in somebody's head yet. And yet this film, and Chris Columbus went on to direct the first 2 Harry Potter movies, as I also said. So the connection is real, and yet it can't have anything to do with him. And yet here we go. You've got this guy, a very clever, special dude who's going off to boarding school. He meets this rather frumpy best friend who's sort of sloppy and clumsy and all these things. And this just sort of bright young girl who's unconventionally lives at the boarding school. It's a school for boys, which is what it would be. She's the daughter of a professor. And they really do match in all sort of thematic and storytelling ways the 3 heroes from the Harry Potter stories. His nemesis, his schoolboy nemesis, is even this obnoxious rich blonde kid,
who's named Dudley, just like Harry Potter's cousin's name is Dudley.
Right. He's a mix of Draco Malfoy and Dudley. He really is like he's those 2 characters put together. He's got this sort of dumbass jock bully of Dudley mixed with this high class, snooty, sort of actually very clever, rich evil kid. It's crazy that's in it. Of course, this particular Draco has sort of a crush on Hermione at the same time. I'll try not to get into too much Harry Potter nomenclature, but it's so similar. There's I don't want to say literally, I want to, because this is where if you're someone who uses literally wrong a lot, it's a great place to trot it out.
Yeah.
It's not literal, but there is almost literally a Defense Against the Dark Arts teacher who is much more than they first appear. In fact, that whole theme of Rowling's of don't really trust your first experience with any given person runs through this story. Almost every single character, the Lestrade in this story, definitely the multiple professors that you meet, the even one of the murder victims, they all follow that sort of, you don't you don't really know what's going on here. You have to solve the mystery before you can gain perspective. You can't just judge people. You can't judge a book by its cover. That's just extremely a big part of this story. And it's huge part of the Harry Potter series. So there's more, it just there's just more things that are referenced. There's the little dinner scene with, and this, of course, it's because it's a English boarding school shot at Oxford. And that's, the Harry Potter stories really are a template of the British boarding school sort of stories. So it's not surprising they would have those things in common, but it's striking. It starts with the three heroes, though. It really does. They go on a little adventure against everybody's best advice, against everyone's attempts to thwart them, and against the better judgment, frankly, of the audience. They go on this adventure in very much the same way that the Harry Potter kids do. And the cast of characters that they bump into and meet affect them and affect the plot in very much the same way. And I haven't thought that this whole time. I didn't think it when I was watching the Harry Potter movies. I just recently came to this revelation. Wow, these are a lot alike. And they are connected by less than 1 degree of separation. Yeah. And that's feels like it can't be a coincidence, although the way the timeline is, it has to be, really.
Right. I mean, you could almost, you could sort of say, like, did Chris Columbus sort of feel like when these movies were, when the Harry Potter movies were going to be made, did he sort of feel like, I know how to do this because I wrote something very similar to this relationship before? Like, was he able to use his experience on young Sherlock Holmes as the writer of it to, maybe that's part of how he sold himself to say, I can direct this because maybe, I don't know.
Maybe, I don't know, but
let me call him and ask him.
It's interesting that it worked out that way.
Yeah. I'll call Chris and I'll say, hey, can I just ask you a couple of questions? I'm from the world-renowned podcast.
And while we're at it, what's with Bicentennial Man, huh? Explain yourself.
Yep. Hey,
drop that in there at the end.
Can you,
if you don't conference me in?
Yep. And can you also apologize for Pixels?
What's that?
Didn't he make a movie called Pixels? And it was like
9 months. I remember that. That's terrible.
Yeah. Anyway. All right. Next up, Sherlock Holmes and the Pyramid of Fear.
In several countries and in several post-market presentations, this film is actually called Sherlock Holmes and the Pyramid of Fear. But before we get to that, that's great that that's next, because that gets us moving along here. I'm taking too much time with this, but I want to talk about my favorite sequence in the film, which happens before we get introduced to the Pyramid of Fear. It's this great scene where Dudley challenges Holmes to find the school's fencing trophy, hides it, and he gives him a time limit to search for it. And it's the moment where the film really becomes what a young Sherlock. It's the only moment really where the film becomes what a Sherlock Holmes film should be. It's delightful. I mean, it's just so wonderful. It's a montage, so I don't know, but I'm not usually a huge montage guy, but it's just wonderful. The music, again, really, really helps. The music in this sequence is great. The deductive reasoning that he goes through is fun. The whole Holmes explains how he figured it out at the end. The professor's betting on whether he's going to be successful at it. I mean, it's this wonderful moment, and I adore it. Anthony Higgins plays his fencing instructor. And there's this, and we should talk about the actors here. Nicholas Rowe, who I adore and adore to this day. He's had a wonderful career. And Alan Cox, who's Brian Cox's son, who plays Watson, who had a growth spurt during this movie, grew almost half a foot while they were shooting this film.
There are these little moments where you're like, wait, what?
They do their best to deal with it, but a kid is growing, and you got him for 3 months, and there's not much you can do. Because they cast a short, sort of slightly overweight kid to play Watson, and what they ended up with was this linebacker at the end. They just had to kind of deal with it. And Sophie, what's her name? She's still working too. All these actors
Sophie
have gone on.
Ward. Yep.
Yeah, Sophie Ward is lovely in it. Those are our heroes. It's important to say that Anthony Higgins was in Raiders of the Lost Ark, and he's sort of it's nice to see him. This is one of his more memorable roles, I think. I can't remember the name of the other film he did, but the other film he did in '85 is really solid too. Kate Fleetwood's in it. Our buddy Freddie Jones. If you ever need somebody to be scared and paranoid and full of bluster, Freddie was the way to go every time. It's great that he's in this. And who's the guy who plays Roger Ashton Griffiths, looking quite skinny compared to how he looks now, plays Lestrade. Lestrade's great in this movie. Very, very clever. He's only Detective Lestrade. He's not Inspector yet. So he's like what would you call it? Who's Gary Oldman in the Batman movies?
Commissioner Gordon. He's just Officer Gordon. He's just
very much that.
No, he's Detective
sort of
Gordon. He's Detective Gordon, and then he becomes Commissioner Gordon.
Yeah, it's that kind of thing, and it's actually handled really, really well in a delightful sort of way. Very similar film in The Goonies. You remember in The Goonies when Jeff Cohen's character calls up the sheriff and says, "Oh, being kidnapped," or whatever. The guy's like, he starts replaying all the lies that he's told. At some point in this film, Sherlock's starting to put stuff together, and he goes to Lestrade and he's like, "Look, this is what I got. You've got to do something." And Lestrade's like, "Oh yeah, like what about the time that you said that the ambassador was going to get kidnapped, and what about the time that?" And you just it's fun that there's all these history of conspiracies that Sherlock has come up with. I love it. And there's a really terrible section of the film where Dudley frames Sherlock for being cheating on a test.
Yeah.
And he actually gets expelled. And you're kind of like, geez, that's heavy for a movie like this. Now these kids are like on their own. And they don't even have the structure of the whole school thing. They really are cut loose. And as they're investigating these darts and this little bits of physical evidence that they find, I'll skip the part with the bar and all that stuff, even though there's all kinds of references to other Sherlock Holmes films that are really great. But let's get right to the Pyramid of Fear. There's a giant underground pyramid where a thuggy cult is doing virgin sacrifices to some weird Indian god. And that's what that's what's at the heart of this conspiracy. Now, we don't know who all the conspirators are yet, but that reveal, that Temple of Doom sequence, and this young girl being murdered, at least to Chris Columbus's credit and to Levinson's, at least that's played for all the horror that it really is. I won't go through the mechanisms by which it happens, but it's horrific, and it's crazy when you're watching it. But it also, again, it's this huge leap into fantasy storytelling. And I got to say, it's this sequence, the Pyramid of Fear, where the critics failed on this movie. They just watched Temple of Doom. Temple of Doom and Gremlins to a lesser degree, but definitely Temple of Doom is credited with creating the PG-13 rating, because it's just some of the violence in it is just off the hook for a PG film. Yeah. And of course, that now all PG-13 movies are just PG movies from that era, and G-rated movies are animated only. So we really didn't change anything by that rating, but for a time there in the late 80s, there really was a difference. They really took the opportunity of that extra rating to push boundaries. And this film wasn't famous enough to cause a controversy, but it definitely pushes boundaries. And this is the sequence where it does it. The Sophie Ward's character, her father plays a mad inventor, rather cartoonish scientist character. But at this point in the movie, by this point in the movie, he's dead.
Flatter.
There's a little Jack Russell Terrier that's our dog sidekick. The film's packed with all these sorts of conventions and things, and it's packed with them. We're not going to be able to talk about all of them, but one thing that we do have to mention before we get to the point where it's an important plot point is that he's created a flying machine pre-Wright brothers. And it's basically a go-kart where you pedal really hard and these wings flap. And somehow the wings flapping to foot pedaling is supposed to be enough to keep it airborne. Of course, that idea is ludicrous. And the thing, when we see it at the beginning when we're introduced to this machine, it appropriately crashes into a tree and it's a complete failure. But it's going to appear later, right, when we need it, of course. So you know, it's what do you call it?
It is the Chekhov's gun.
Flying go-kart.
Yeah, this Chekhov's flying go-kart. Yep.
Sorry, Pavlov's. that actually is not too far from being true as well.
Pavlov's drooling go-kart.
These kids show up at this pyramid. They see this sacrifice. Holmes has to interject, even though he's really helpless to do anything. But he gets this crazy group of cultish Indian characters chasing them through this graveyard, of course. Very creepy. And they all get hit with darts, and they all have their hallucinations. Sophie's is the worst. She dreams of being buried alive by her own father, which is really terrifying. If you're claustrophobic, and there's this sequence of her falling into this bottomless grave and with her hands desperately trying to stop from falling and scraping down the side of the walls. It's very, very, again, it's very effect heavy, but it actually is affecting, that's the balance we're looking for. The worst one, although from an animation standpoint, the most impressive is Watson getting attacked by all the sweets that he's eating that's making him so fat. Watson's portliness is a shameful part of the plot of this thing.
Yeah.
Watson he's actually, thankfully, Cox's character has his moments where he really does contribute to it, solving the mystery and helping the story. He has his moments of heroism, which I appreciate, but he is very much the bumbling, silly sidekick to Holmes in this that he really isn't in Doyle's works. But leading
to the line later on, "If Mr. Cream Puff, you're just a cream puff. No talking back to me now, Mr. Cream Puff."
He gets attacked by cream puffs and a Twinkie and a bunch of different little things in this cabinet of cakes and horrors. It's hard. I have to see it to really understand what it is. I'm going to stop describing it because no amount of me describing it gets to what it is. It's correct. It's astounding, but it's kind of terrible.
You know what it made me think of?
Hard to explain.
You know what it made me think of? That movie, Better Off Dead with John Cusack.
The hamburger.
But the hamburger scene made me think of the hamburger scene.
It's very similar to that.
Yeah,
it's also like imagine if the "let's go out to the lobby" guys who are like walking by on the thing just turned and tried to kill you.
Correct.
That's the sense. You get the sense of this sequence.
That is yep. Anywho,
and Holmes is actually pretty great and has some hints in canon that something happened there. There's we talked about what our favorite Holmes favorite Holmes adaptations was. You'll note this wasn't on it. It would be in there somewhere. It's not terrible Holmes adaptation, but it isn't on it because they're much better ones. But this film in this moment shares a lot from Nicholas Meyer's novel, The 7% Solution, and therefore the Herb Ross's film. And part of it is there's this traumatic childhood event that he's gone through. The film keeps it, and I even if the film's explicit about it, maybe it does come right out and show you what it is, but whether it does or doesn't, I'm not going to tell you what it is.
No, it doesn't. It does. It really doesn't show you. It doesn't show you, but it tells. It sort of it hints at it. It hints pretty directly. Kind of unambiguously hints at what it was that Holmes discovered.
Yeah, that's part of these different Holmes adaptations. That's a big part of 7% Solution, and what causes his cocaine addiction in that particular film. And it's hinted at in our favorite Holmes adaptation, which was a fantastic movie called Murder by Decree by Buddy Bob Clark. But anyway, those aside. This sequence is interesting, but the food ruins it. I don't know how to explain it, but that's just too silly. It's stupid and silly, and it was never going to be horrific. It was only going to be silly. And that sort of takes the sequence down a peg. But interesting stuff. They get arrested. They have to escape. and they're being chased. Well, first they save Chester Cradwich's life, Freddie Jones, because they figure out he's the next in line. Again, I won't go into the mystery, but that sequence, you are Chester Cradwich. They're these kids helplessly trying to keep this grown man from killing himself via these hallucinations. His particular hallucination is fire, and that's actually pretty effective.
Yeah.
It's cool, that sequence. I'm skipping around a little bit, but I don't want to leave out.
Well, yeah, I mean, we find, and I mean, that's the Chester Cradwich scene is where we learn what this whole pyramid of fear is about.
Chester explains it all to us.
He gets Johnny exposition and sort of lets everybody in on it. So again, not a mystery that Holmes needed to solve to really, it just was like, hey, this is happening, and it's not worthy of Holmes, really, but that's correct.
That's not a knock on Columbus. Columbus wants to give us whimsy. He wants to give us young characters. He wants to give us the feel of a Sherlock Holmes adventure in the template of a mid-'80s Spielbergian effects-heavy film. And given that that's the mission statement, it achieves it. It really does get there. So that's cool, but it is a weird mishmash of things, no doubt. Somewhere along the line, Sophie Ward's dad dies, the inventor, and that's pretty heavy. There's a funeral and everything. The film, as you would expect any Holmes film to have, has a voiceover by an old Watson looking back on the days of his youth. And he says, I've only seen my partner cry on 2 occasions. And one was when the death of this professor that it meant so much to him. I don't think I'm going to expose who the real bad guys are, or we're not going to say what the crime is or what the connections are, even though Joel says it's perfunctory once you get there. But once you have a different character that's not Holmes explain it all to you, that's part of why the hunt for the fencing trophy is so wonderful, because he has to explain it to us, and I think that feels very Holmesian to us.
And here's why I think one of the big failures of the movie is the fact that this expulsion works. The expulsion succeeds.
Yes.
To me, that would have been, and actually, and it never pays off, because I kept waiting for, I hadn't seen this movie in a very, very long time. So I rewatched it, and I kept watching, and I kept waiting, going, wait, does he tie it all back in? Does he tie the expulsion back into this plot at all? Wait, why? He goes
off to live with his brother at the end of the movie.
It's really,
he does get revenge on Dudley. He dyes his hair white.
Yeah,
that's it. That's what that in the end, in most ways. And this might be what's brilliant about young Sherlock Holmes, is that there is very, very little justice doled out throughout the film.
Sure. Yeah.
Given what has occurred, there's very little justice. You get the feel of it while the film repeatedly, like, dyeing Dudley's hair is funny. He comes out with this white hair and he's swearing and he's all upset. But does that make up for a young, promising kid being expelled from school? No. Does finally winning the big fencing match at the end of the film and the big finale, does that make up for these girls being murdered or these guys being, tricked into their own deaths?
Sherlock Holmes doesn't actually even win the duel. Doesn't even actually win the duel.
He fights to a draw, basically.
Fights to a draw,
how he wins,
and
which is a classic.
Wins,
which is a classic fencing, a fencing scene idea that if you don't try and win, somehow you won't lose. The movie explains it better than I'm going to. But did I skip anything before we got to the big fencing duel?
You skipped. You'll believe 3 dumb kids could fly.
It's so stupid, Joel, and yet it's the thing in the movie that really turns me into a 13-year-old kid again. That flying across London with Bruce's music just booming through the speakers, and they're the kid, there's Nick and their reactions to it are so real, and the effects are so wonderful, the mechanical effects and everything, and it's all edited seamlessly together. It's this wonderful sequence where they fly across London back to the temple, escaping their pursuers and going after the bad guys. And the bad guy, the fencing duel, like down, it's very Holmesian again, down on the docks and where the water's partly frozen and stuff. Like it's all well choreographed and wonderful. That flying sequence, so it is stupid, but you'll believe somehow the movie, which has taken all kinds of wrong turns up to this point, it nails this thing and makes it feel sort of exhilarating. And I think if it didn't, we wouldn't be talking about it today, truly. Right. Like, I really do think that stupid flying sequence, as dumb as it is, is glorious. It's really, really wonderful and magical.
Our job, so Holmes and Watson get back to where they get back to the Pyramid of Fear, where
Sophie's now the sacrifice.
Yeah, Sophie's about to be sacrificed,
so
and again,
she turns into a damsel. That's kind of too bad.
Yep,
she's been more of an equal partner up to this point, but whatever.
Yep, and
better than them saving a stranger, I suppose.
Yeah, and
to Columbus's credit, he put a female character in the heart of the thing, which, if it were a real Holmes story, would almost certainly would not have.
Correct.
It's got a pretty, without spoiling too much, got a pretty bitchin' female villain as well.
Yeah, and the one thing that Columbus tries to do in the script is to set up why Sherlock is always alone. Why does he?
That's one of the goals, is how does this guy become that way? Well, here's an origin story for him. Yeah. For this, because he's very much Sherlock Holmes in this, and yet Nick does play that innocence and that love of life and that excitement for the future, all those things that a young person should have. He is not a dour contemplative character. We are to experience what makes him so, I think that to some degree, it's in a very simple way, but I think that actually works pretty well. So.
That works. So we get and then we get that final duel. We're gonna go, we talked about that, and then we get what's past is epilogue.
Well, that's what you were just talking about. That's where I wanted to kind of talk about what makes this guy what he is, and it's all done really well. The old guy who's doing Watson's voiceover is great. I can't remember his name. He's a pretty famous actor, or semi-famous British character actor. Cox, again, Alan Cox is a really, really good actor. I haven't seen him in much compared to the rest of these, but I liked him in this. And the film has this bittersweet ending. It's a brave ending for a movie that is bending over backwards to be crowd pleasing when maybe it shouldn't be. When it does get to landing this idea that this guy goes on to be a isolated, obsessed drug addict, while brilliant, a high functioning sort of bipolar guy. And I think that's relatable for if you're a guy like me, but it's a hard thing to earn we've talked about this time and time again. It's not bad that the movie is trying to get there. We've talked about it, which the most obvious, I keep coming back to it because I think it's the most obvious thing. There's a great scene in Thomas Harris's Manhunter where Hannibal Lecter tells Will Graham, you're looking for some incident that created me, and what you have to come to grips with is I was always this. You're not going to find some breaking point where I became a psycho. This is who I am. This is what me being true to my spirit. And it's a horrifying idea that, of course, that series and every other series I can think of goes on to disprove by trying to create some trauma that creates some character. That's dramatically satisfying, but I think when you really kick back and think about it, and you're not supposed to think too much about young Sherlock Holmes, it doesn't quite work, actually.
Yep.
And I won't say more than that because that would be to reveal what the ending really is. And that I thought we were going to do that, Joel, but we got to the end without really doing it. And I think that's kind of cool.
And now it does mean that it's going to be difficult to talk about the post-credit scene.
No, I can do it.
Before we get there, we have so Watson. Because Holmes, now that so everyone escapes, we do have this bittersweet bittersweet ending. We reflect upon our losses, but Watson says
we
goodbye to
part
Holmes
ways until
Yep.
we presumably meet back up as adults.
Yeah,
in the future.
and so Watson, says, "I knew that this would be, one of many adventures with him, and I thank Holmes for turning me into the man that I am." And blah 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 blah. And so then fades out, and then we start getting this wintry scene, which is awesome. But as that's coming up, we get this the great old timey font. But it says
the story ends on Christmas Day.
Yeah.
And this sometime later in January is what we fade to, where it's really snowy and we're out in the country. We're no longer in London. And go ahead. Sorry, with your magnifying glass.
And so then we get this thing that comes up. It says, although Sir Arthur Conan Doyle did not write about the very youthful years of Sherlock Holmes and did establish the initial meeting between Holmes and Dr. Watson as adults, this affectionate speculation about what might have happened has been made with respectful admiration and in tribute to the author and his enduring works.
Okay, that's a text that fills up the screen for like a minute and a half.
Yeah, it's up there a while.
And we've already had a disclaimer. So it's kind of funny. And that's not even the last one that we...
What made me laugh is it's on the screen longer than one of our main characters gets to grieve at the gravesite of a loved one.
Right. Let's hurry up and get through this with a voiceover. The disclaimer, the second disclaimer of 3 has more screen time than some of the stars in the thing. It really is absurd. But again, he's tiptoeing very carefully.
Mm-hmm.
He really doesn't want to piss off the Doyles or any of the fellow Sherlock Holmes fans. The shame is he didn't piss off the Doyles. I'm sure they took their check and were pretty happy. The film is fairly respectful, I think, of Holmes to the degree it can be. Yeah. But the Sherlock Holmes fans, I mean, they don't buy into this. It wouldn't be on their top 10 list.
No.
So
and so we get, so we're in, and all this is going on, and then we get this, then the credits start rolling, but the credits are rolling over this lovely wintry scene of this carriage, but the carriage is a sleigh.
Yeah, it's a camera on a trolley following the back of a sleigh that's being carried by horses, I believe, not reindeer. That would be a little much. But it is a sleigh, and there's something very unique about that, right? I mean, it's not a carriage. It's weird. And again, Broughton's score, the credits are cool. It's cool to have something to look at, but you're looking at something different. And why are we looking at something different? It's because there's a post-credit scene, and post-credit scenes are as old as movies themselves, but ones of this style and of this type and the way this one goes it's a very, very in with what modern post-credit scenes are. Am I right, Joel?
Correct.
It's very much a forerunner of the kinds of things that we experience in movies today. Somebody gets out of the carriage. It is a very familiar face we've seen before. And they go to the registry at some country hotel that they've shown up at, and they write down their name, Professor Moriarty. Yeah. And then the film cuts to black, and
cuts to the dude's eyes, and the guy gives us the little eyebrow. I can't do it. He gives us a little gives us a little single eyebrow, and it's great. And then
takes to the camera are always welcome.
And then fades out with suggested by the characters created by Sir Arthur Conan Doyle. Use of some of the characters with the kind permission of Dame Jean Conan Doyle.
Please don't hate us.
Please don't hate me. Please don't hate this. Please. I beg of you. Please.
Young Sherlock Holmes, man.
And that's young Sherlock Holmes.
Woo!
It's a love letter. I mean, it's a love letter to Holmes. To me, I mean, you're absolutely right. The best sequence in the film is the only Holmesian sequence. It's where there's
a great sequence where Holmes and Watson first meet, and of course they got to nail that one too, where Holmes deducts everything there is to know about Watson just by looking at him. That's fun too. That's very that's very much how it goes when
Mm-hmm.
in modern tellings of Holmes stories where they meet. He
Yeah.
kind of lets the whole thing fly. And of course, he always gets one thing wrong that the character
Correct.
has to explain to him, where the deductive reasoning was solid. But Doyle's always telling us that in and of itself isn't enough. There's got to be something more, because you will get a detail wrong. So
Right.
brilliantly, in the Cumberbatch and what's his face, he gets the detail he gets wrong it's wonderful, and why he gets it wrong, his assumptions. Like this has kind of that as well, and it's very cool.
And you know, and that's a running thing throughout the whole thing. Is he, Holmes asks Watson, you're in a room with a north facing window, I think is what it is, and a bear walks by. What color is the bear? And
don't ruin it though.
Yeah, and
because Watson's wrong guesses throughout the film are extremely funny.
Right, and well, here's what I'll say is eventually he gets it right, and Holmes goes, and Holmes goes, why? And he goes, because I've run out of colors. And Holmes, because Holmes says, well, an answer without reasoning gets you nowhere.
It's also from reading through the trivia this morning, which I always do as a cheat when we're going to do a deep dive. They say it's one of the very few, if only, versions that the Holmes fans can think of where Lestrade actually gets to save the day at one point.
Yeah.
Normally he's a dime short and a dollar later, or whatever the phrase is. He's there, but he didn't quite make it in time, and our heroes have to suss out for themselves. Lestrade very much dismisses him early in the film, and then very much comes to the rescue, and of course it gets him promoted to inspector at the end. And the Lestrade character in the film is great. There's a lot of little details and a lot of little homages to love. It's the melding of Indiana Jones and the Temple of Doom with Sherlock Holmes that is a trick. It's a tough one to get over. Audiences in the day did not. Critics definitely did not. And its legacy really is that, it's just like Temple of Doom. Like that really was They solve the murders, but they don't bring a lot of justice. I really do like that about it, though. I really think that's kind of neat. And you find out they bring even less. By the end of it, you find out they bring even less than you thought, than even the movie was showing you at first.
Right.
And that's pretty neat.
All right.
And bittersweet and sad.
Mm-hmm. So that brings us to the end of this episode, our wonderful hodgepodge of stuff. We did the gamut today. Young Sherlock Holmes, Stephen Sondheim, Game of Thrones, man, we covered it.
Yeah.
And next week is the final episode, is our season finale. It is our holiday extravaganza, and once again we are bringing in the movie club. The movie club is back. Shauna will be joining us once again for a discussion. We're going to be looking at holiday films, but no Prancer this time. These are
we're going to be looking at non-holiday films that at one point or another take place during the holidays is what we're going to be looking at.
And don't think we're going to be talking about, we're not talking about Die Hard. We're not talking about these are movies that
certainly counts, but that's not what we're going to be talking about.
Yeah.
But it's that idea, and we'll tell you the three movies in case you want to watch them ahead of time and get on board, because I've been criticized for not doing that, especially with movie club episodes.
Yep.
The films are going to be Age of Adeline, About a Boy, and The Drop, which is the crime drama. The Drop's a little vague, but everybody knows About a Boy. Age of Adeline fairly recently, which is kind of takes place during New Year's, sort of. And those are the three. So watch them, and we'll discuss them next week, and it'll be fun for everybody. If you got any comments or anything you want to hit on. Also, our question next week, we can let that go too. What's your favorite holiday movie scene in a non-holiday movie?
There you go.
I would argue that, frankly, It's a Wonderful Life is a non-holiday movie that takes place during the holidays, but hey, argue that with me if you'd like.
Sure. Yeah. Get a pocket full of Zuzu's pedals and come at me. All right. Yeah. So again, you can reach out to us.
Cult member shoots somebody with a dart in the streets of London, an angel gets its wings.
Here's one thing that isn't talked about with that cult is,
Mhm.
it said that, later, because it's like, oh, you built this cult up with, on the homeless and the disenfranchised and blah, 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 with, whatever. But you know what they all had? They all had amazing singing voices. They had spectacular voices.
Wow.
And
they were
that,
a demon chorus from heaven.
They really nailed it. So, all right, reach out to us at the Movie Show with Joel and Ryan page on Facebook. Ask Joel and Ryan on Twitter, Instagram, and TikTok, and the Movie Show with Joel and Ryan page here on YouTube. If you are watching the video feed, leave a comment below, click that subscribe button, and all that fun stuff. And of course, you know what I haven't mentioned you should do if you haven't in a long time? You should subscribe and rate us on Apple Podcasts or on Stitcher or Spotify, wherever you're listening.
Please, for the love of all things good in the world, do that.
That would be something you could do. And that is going to do it for this week. We look forward to seeing you next week for the holidays. Take care, everybody.
Bye.
Thank you for listening to The Movie Show with Joel and Ryan. Remember, all views and opinions represented in this podcast are personal and belong solely to the speaker and do not represent those people, institutions, or organizations that the speaker may or may not be associated with, unless explicitly stated. None of these views and opinions were intended to malign or deceive. And now, here's the producers, circa 1982, to play us out.
I forgot, so I'm going to say it right now. I forgot to say that Nicholas Rowe has a cameo in Mr. Holmes, where he plays Sherlock Holmes in a movie that the actual Sherlock Holmes is watching about himself, where he is investigating deaths by poisoning that cause hallucinations. How cool is that?
Yep. And of course, that movie was written by Jeffrey Hatcher from Minnesota.
Not exactly friend of the show, but all around good guy and awesome, right?
Oh, yeah. Yeah. So, yeah.